Chapter 1. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sleepy town of Kage. The streets, usually bustling with life, grew quiet as the townsfolk whispered tales of the Kage ghost. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging wary glances, as if the very mention of the ghost might summon it from the depths of the forest that bordered the town. "I swear I heard her cries last night," a woman said, her voice trembling as she clutched her child tighter. It was like the wails of a lost soul, echoing through the trees. "Don't be foolish," a man scoffed, rolling his eyes. "It's just a story to scare the children. Ghosts aren't real." But deep down, everyone knew the truth. They had heard the stories, had felt the chill that crept along their spines when the wind howled through the pines. The Kage ghost was no mere legend. She was a nightmare that haunted their very existence. The tale began decades ago, when a young woman named Aiko vanished without a trace. She had been the pride of Kage, a vibrant soul with dreams that soared higher than the tallest trees. One fateful night, she ventured into the forest to gather herbs, promising her family she would return before dark. But darkness fell, and Aiko never came back. The townsfolk searched for her, scouring the forest for days, but it was as if she had been swallowed whole by the earth. It wasn't until weeks later that they found her. Her lifeless body sprawled at the base of an ancient tree, her eyes wide open in terror, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Something had taken her, something that lurked in the shadows, waiting patiently for its next victim. "Do you think she suffered?" a young girl asked, her voice barely a whisper as she listened to the adults share the story. "Of course she did," a man replied, his face pale. "They say she was cursed, that her spirit roams the forest, searching for those who wronged her. Or those who remind her of herself," another added, shivering at the thought. As the sun set, a thick fog rolled in, enveloping the town in an unsettling embrace. The streets grew darker, and the air turned colder. Windows were shut tight, doors locked, as families huddled together, trying to keep the horrors at bay. But the Kage ghost was relentless. Two teenagers, Yuki and Haru, sat on the edge of town, daring each other to venture into the woods. "It's just a story," Haru insisted, though his voice wavered. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Let's go," Yuki urged, adrenaline pumping through her veins. "We'll prove they're all wrong." With shaky breaths, they entered the forest as the last rays of sunlight disappeared. The trees loomed above them, black silhouettes against a deepening sky. Shadows danced at the corners of their vision, and the oppressive silence weighed heavily on their shoulders. "Do you hear that?" Yuki whispered, her heart racing. A distant sound echoed, a sorrowful wail that sent shivers down their spines. Haru scoffed, trying to mask his fear. "It's just the wind," he said, though he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. They pressed on, deeper into the woods, the wails growing louder. "Maybe we should turn back," Yuki suggested, her voice trembling. "No way, we're going to find her. We're going to prove she's just a story." Haru's bravado was fading, his bravado slipping as the shadows closed in around them. Then they saw it, a figure pale and ethereal standing among the trees, the Kage ghost. Her hair flowed like mist, her eyes hollow and dark, and her mouth twisted into an expression of anguish. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the night. Yuki screamed, the sound piercing the silence as she stumbled back. But it was too late. The ghost lunged forward, a blur of white and shadow, and Haru was caught in her grasp. "Yuki!" he cried, panic flooding his voice. "Run!" But she couldn't move. The ghost's icy fingers wrapped around Haru's throat, and he gasped, struggling for breath. The forest filled with the sound of cracking bones, and then there was silence. Yuki turned and fled, the ghost's chilling laughter echoing in her ears. She didn't stop until she burst through the tree line, collapsing onto the pavement of the town. Gasping for breath, she looked back, heart racing. The forest was still, but the wails continued, a haunting melody that would never fade. The townsfolk would hear them, night after night, the cries of those who had ventured too close to the darkness. Chapter 2. The next day the townsfolk gathered in the square, murmurs of fear swirling around them like a storm. Yuki stood among them, face pale and eyes wide. She had witnessed the horror, had seen the truth of the Kage Mori ghost, but no one would believe her. "It's real," she shouted, voice cracking. "I saw her. She took Haru." "Enough of your nonsense," an older man barked, shaking his head. "You're just trying to scare us. Haru is probably at home, sleeping off a hangover." But Yuki knew better. She had felt the cold touch of death, had heard the ghost's mournful cries for help. It was only a matter of time before the Kage Mori ghost claimed another victim. That night, as darkness fell, the town was gripped by fear. Windows were boarded up, and the streets were deserted. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees, carrying with it the ghost's haunting song. In an attempt to confront the fear head-on, a group of brave souls gathered at the edge of the forest. They were armed with flashlights and makeshift weapons, determined to end the ghost's reign of terror once and for all. "I'm not afraid," a young man named Kenji declared, his voice steady. "We'll find her and put her to rest." The others nodded, though their faces were pale. They stepped into the darkness, the trees closing in around them like a suffocating shroud. With each step, the air grew colder and the ghostly wails surrounded them, echoing off the trunks like a cruel joke. "Maybe this was a mistake," one of the women whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Shh, we're almost there," Kenji insisted, pushing forward. But deep down, he felt the same dread gnawing at his insides. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, a ghostly silhouette drifting between the trees. "Help me!" it called, voice echoing like a siren. "Stay together!" Kenji shouted, but the group was already scattering, fear taking hold. One by one, they fell into the darkness, lost to the shadows. Screams erupted as the ghost lunged at them, her icy fingers tearing through flesh like paper. Blood splattered against the trees, painting the forest in a gruesome tableau of horror. The moonlight illuminated the scene for just a moment, revealing the ghostly figure wreathed in a shroud of red, her face twisted in rage and sorrow. Kenji was the last to stand, heart racing as he stumbled backward. "What do you want?" he cried, desperation flooding his voice. But the ghost only laughed, a sound that chilled his bones. "You cannot save me," she whispered, eyes glinting with a hunger that transcended death. "You are all like the others, lost souls, searching for answers in the darkness." With a swift motion she lunged, and Kenji felt the cold grip of death close around him. He gasped, and in that moment, the world faded away, leaving only the echo of the ghost's laughter ringing in his ears. Chapter 3. Days turned into weeks, and the town of Kage Mori fell silent. The once bustling streets were empty, the shops shuttered. Families had fled, leaving behind their homes, haunted by the memories of the lost. Yuki, now a ghost of her former self, wandered the streets, her heart heavy with guilt. She had failed to save her friends, had watched as the ghost claimed their lives. The truth was a dark weight on her shoulders, a burden she couldn't escape. "Why didn't I listen?" she whispered to the wind, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why couldn't I save them?" The forest loomed at the edge of town, a dark abyss that seemed to beckon her closer. Its whispers called to her, promising answers, solace, and the chance to confront the horror head-on. One night, unable to bear the weight of her grief, Yuki stepped into the darkness, drawn towards the heart of the forest. The wails of the ghost echoed around her, a mournful symphony that filled her with dread. "Aiko," she called, voice trembling. "I'm here. I want to help you." The forest fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. For a moment, it felt as if time stood still, the shadows holding their breath. Then the ghost appeared, a figure wreathed in sorrow, eyes glimmering with a mix of pain and rage. "Help?" Aiko's voice was a chilling whisper, laced with bitterness. "You cannot help me. I am trapped in this nightmare, bound to this forest by the very souls who abandoned me. Yuki's heart raced, fear and empathy intertwining. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to understand." But Aiko's laughter echoed through the trees, dark and hollow. "Understanding will not save you, child. You are just one more lost soul, destined to join the others." Yuki felt a cold dread wash over her, the realization hitting her like a wave. There was no escape from the Kage Mori ghost, no hope of redemption. She had stumbled into a trap, one that would consume her just as it had consumed the others. With a final scream, Yuki was swallowed by the darkness, her voice lost amid the ghostly wails. The town of Kage Mori stood silent, forever haunted by the terror that lurked within the shadows, a chilling reminder that some legends are born from the darkest corners of the human heart, and the price of curiosity is often far too high. In the end, the forest remained, a gaping maw waiting to claim its next victim, with the cries of the Kage Mori ghost echoing through the trees, a haunting lullaby for the damned.